Hey folks, welcome back to Gaming Garbage. I saw something on Twitter X where someone was saying that, the main focus had always been multiplayer games. And I have to disagree with that. And it's not like I'm disagreeing with the person necessarily, but the notion that games have been focused on multiplayer. And the reason I'm making a video on this is because I think, as I started thinking, I think it's been interesting to see where gaming has actually gone. And it's kind of gone like back and forth with this thing with single player versus um, kind of like everything else. Yeah, the thing that I think is interesting is like the focus has shifted back and forth, and I'll kind of get to that. And I don't have any notes in front of me, so this will probably be kind of all over the place. But like when we start looking at video games as themselves, they were just on PC. It was very expensive to actually play these because PCs were not very common. In today's money, I mean, it would be like $10,000 for a PC, right, in like the 1980s. It'd be very, very expensive. Maybe 3 or 4 thousand for some of these for the cheaper models. And again, it's not like these games were amazing or anything. Okay, these were very simplistic games. But they were too just to be seen as something or like a learning tool or whatever. And it quickly expanded past that. Tetris would be kind of like a good example. When we follow video games, well, we had the Atari, and well, there was a crash with that. That can be a separate video. But like the crash got pretty bad. Hold on, I gotta mute this. So yeah, there was a crash with Atari, and there was just too many games. It wasn't focused on quality, and Atari couldn't actually stop developers from making games because there was really only one console at the time. Well, the crash happened pretty hard, and gaming was not to be over at that point. But Atari had multiple a lot of single player experiences, but there was also some multiplayer stuff too, which would be seen as PvP today. And then we had the NES. And again, a lot of the IPs that we had, a lot of the focus was put on single player for the NES. That's what a lot of the characters are that we actually grew up with. Now, while Super Mario was a multiplayer game technically, it wasn't like multiplayer in the sense that we think of today. I specifically remember playing Super Mario Bros. 3 with my dad, and in that game, you could focus on, running a time trial basically of the level, and both of you would have a shot. And you would work on moving through the world and everything. And that was kind of an interesting way to play. But it wasn't like multiplayer. Okay, it wasn't built on that. But like the whole game was focused on story and like the level design and the creativity and the different bosses, which was really cool. Mega Man would have been another one actually. Mega Man was really big on the NES and Super Nintendo. But again, a lot of the games that we grew up with the NES and also going forward were single player experiences, but some of them were coupled with co-op or single player. I remember like Super Sprint, you could play that by yourself with bots, or you could actually play that with two up to four other people, I think, or just two other people. But Super Sprint was actually pretty fun. There was also Excite Bike as well, and so it's not like the idea was like it's only multiplayer or it's only single player. We had both. So I think it's disingenuous to say that gaming has always been a single player experience or that gaming has always been a multiplayer experience. I think both are correct, but it becomes disingenuous when you only include one side of it. And I think it takes both actually to make gaming because they've both always been there and they both have their place. The thing that I think is unique with console is that we're at a point now where console always used to be about the kind of co-op multiplayer PvP side of stuff, but we've lost the co-op and split screen side of console. And now it's only one per console, which is more sales and all of that. I definitely think that's on purpose. But it's also just become less about the cooperativeness and more about the PvP. And this has become the focus really for live service. And so we've had an era where 80s, 90s, and 2000s were very much about the characters, the story, why you're doing things, the memorable moments in the games that we played, and multiplayer was on the side. Well, in 2010, we made this shift, definitely. Kind of starting with Halo in the 360, that was still 2000s, where like multiplayer was becoming more of a staple, and it became even more so and was more focused on, but almost every single type of IP out there in 2010s. We're talking about COD, Battlefield. We had the creation of Fortnite, and Rainbow Six didn't, became a multiplayer game. Now we had other games that were made like X Defiant or Apex or Overwatch, which Overwatch won Game of the Year actually in 2016. Believe it or not, we haven't had one win Game of the Year ever since. We even had games too, like COD, where they didn't actually come with a campaign. That was Black Ops 4, and that was really the last time they did that. Though they did have their offshoot mode of Warzone and Blackout for kind of the free to play experience to compete with battle royales and stuff and make money that way. So it's always been coupled with making money, but multiplayer has really shifted now and been the main focus for a little over a decade. And it's gotten really big, I think, since 2015 with Rainbow Six Siege, because they've never made another Rainbow after that. Hopefully they do, because Rainbow Six is a wonderful IP, but they're just not utilizing it. And I think now everyone has kind of gotten burnt out with the focus of live service. We always know that while we're playing and while stuff is being pushed in our face and basically ads to buy more content, whether home screen or pop ups or whatever, is that we're reminded that really they just continue to want more money. And that really feels extremely greedy after a while, especially when the microtransactions become macro transactions and they're now like $40 bundles and like hundreds of dollars for a skin and all of this craziness. And again, as a free to play model, that can be fine, like where the wins meet, like a $40,000 skin, which is crazy, or like Star Citizen, maybe if it's really seen as a premium product. But I think some of the falsehood here is that it's only just multiplayer. Well, that's just what this person is kind of experienced and focused on. And that's okay. There's no issue with that. But to say that it's, always been a focus of multiplayer, well, that's what consoles were for. The issue, though, is that the consoles don't really do that anymore. They feel more like a single player experience. We've also had other things, too, getting taken away, or just communities no longer trying or caring, like being able to talk and communicate. Every multiplayer game, regardless really of where you're playing on the type of console, the lobbies are just basically silent, whether it's Battlefield or COD or Overwatch or anything. And these games, they have the ability to talk openly, but through just the absurdity of hate among players, or just the censorship and stuff through the companies, which I don't think the companies should be doing that. I think it should be up to the players. And even hateful speech is kind of more appreciated to a degree, like what we had in Call of Duty lobbies, with just absolute silence today. And we kind of lost that level of respect for other players. And so I think that's kind of how multiplayer ultimately died, and why people now are wanting to go back to campaigns and single players and co-ops and stuff like Helldivers 2, because they're ready to get back to a point where they feel like they belong to something, where they're working on making the friends and they're engaging with people, because that's really why a lot of us actually still play today or make content or whatever. But I think it's, again, kind of frustrating to see the greed from the companies, and then also to see the disrespect among other players. And it doesn't have to be dog eat dog out there. The games are designed that way, though, like Arc Raiders or Marathon or COD, or, I mean, take your pick. They're all basically designed with PvP in mind, but what's starting to come back, and I wish would come back even stronger, is the PvE side, the cooperativeness, like we had in Destiny, like we had in Anthem, like we've had in some other games, or even just like the next game coming out, the total remake of Halo Campaign Evolved. I'm excited to actually play that with one of my friends starting this month. And we're going to play the whole co-op thing together, and that should be pretty exciting. That should be a fun time. And that's what a lot of us, I think, grew up with in the 2000s, and why multiplayer became so fascinating and so focused on. But when the company started seeing the opportunity for money, well, the corporates really took over and bastardized the whole thing. And they want you to again spend as much money as possible. And since console is slowly dying anyway, then they're just further monetizing the player base that's left. And I think all of these IPs are doing this, or they're going free to play, or they're constantly having things on sale or whatever. And now we have a point which is kind of adjacent to this, is that we have a lot of developers now inside these studios that don't know how to actually make characters, character development moments, and stories. They don't have the creativity to do that because now for over, roughly a decade, they've been making just these live service push games, which is very boring. And we even see this in Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced, where, we used to have these types of skins which looked like actual pirates in the original, or like in Rogue. And now what we have is kind of this codification of like Call of Duty skins where it's like hyper pink and purple and like bright orange and big green and neon blue, and it's just like, what are we doing? Like, that's a catering to a type of audience, and there's kind of a jadedness there to this live service aspect of multiplayer. And I still think multiplayer is awesome, but I think what needs again to come back is that live service needs to take a back seat, and the focus needs to be the story again. And the reason these remasters and remakes are selling so well, or that they keep happening, which when you take a look at how many we usually have, it was maybe a dozen or less per year. A dozen was actually a lot for a year across the board, but what we're seeing now is that there are anywhere from 2 to 3 dozen per year that are coming out. We only get to see a few of them, right, because those are mainstream for console, but console is kind of slowly killing itself off by screwing up the respect in the player base, the PvE side, the cooperativeness, and they've kind of worked on creating this environment now where multiplayer really isn't that fun. And everybody I know, they're basically quit COD. Also, too, just about everybody that I know also just did not like Battlefield 6. It had a good start, but man, as soon as that live service came in, whether they realized it or not, that's just when they quit, and couldn't really get them to play anymore. And like, I'm still willing to play some multiplayer games, but like Arc Raiders, I wasn't interested. I'm also tired of just the live service model and just paying now for what used to be free to play models. Paying $40, it's still not enough, and it's just a money hungry machine. And the corporatization has just completely infiltrated the gaming space. And so now Eastern studios or smaller independents are making games that people want to play, which have no multiplayer whatsoever, and it's multiplayer is just kind of being left in the dust because it's so one-sided. Even just taking a look at like Destiny 3, people have been thinking and expecting that since 2019, and we still don't have it. That in itself is roughly 8 years where we've kind of been expecting that from Bungie, and we still don't have it. They continued to focus on Destiny 2, which was monetizing the player base any way that they could, putting less into PvP, putting more into skins and the Eververse store and all of this stuff, and even more content just to pay for. And then they started taking the content you paid for away, which is totally backwards. And then at the end of the day, we ultimately got Marathon, which I think could have been really cool. But again, we followed the trend of the PvP side of multiplayer, and we just have an extraction shooter. And we even see that now. I just did a video on this with Far Cry 7, also having an extraction shooter or an extraction shooter element to the game. And it's just like, how are these publishers not paying attention with the trends that have been going on since the beginning of the 2020s? Because that's when we started having some of these live service games fail, like Babylon's Fall. So, I can't agree that multiplayer is all it is. But also, Twitter X is not a real place. That's apparent very quickly. And but yeah, the characters and the places and the events that happen in games, that is what really solidifies it for the player. And you can expound on that through multiplayer, which I think is cool. And it should, I think, always be that way. But like the frustration for me too with Overwatch is that there's a lot of lore there, there's a lot of characters, there's a lot of things to dig into with the history and the things that have happened. But again, we don't get to experience any of those because, again, the main push design is just to get you to play, just to buy more stuff. And, unfortunately, that's how it's going for a lot of IPs. And I think these companies are, again, going to push that as far as they can and sprinkle in some, updates or remasters in between and try to just continue to make money that way. But I think we have this massive shift back to single player, and that's how Capcom is doing extremely well. And again, they have kind of the multiplayer side, but they're trying to make a single player experience first through the world building, through the lore, through the events and the characters, and ultimately that's what's going to sell. And hopefully, some of the IPs that we haven't seen in a long time, they actually come back. I mean, we haven't seen Command and Conquer, we haven't seen Splinter Cell, we haven't had Sly Cooper, Jack and Dexter, Ratchet and Clank. We haven't had any even type of um, adjacents to those. They're just completely gone, and I think it's really cool that Toys for Bob is making another Spyro game. My children and I were actually quite excited for that. So I grew up with that, got them to play it. They're loving it, and so yeah, we're gonna play that at the toward the end of the year. When it releases. But yeah, it's that kind of stuff that carries you through, and multiplayer has its place, but we got to get back to actually what multiplayer was, where it was about the people. It wasn't about you getting more experience. And that just shows too with like the Black Ops 1 and 2 ports for PlayStation 4 and 5 is that players immediately exploited stuff right away to maximize experience boost basically in experience lobbies, and it's like you guys are totally missing the point. So I do blame the younger generations because that is what the whole live service thing was catered to, which is I think disgusting. That's in my opinion that's exploitation of children, or people that are not fully developed yet, which for most of us we're not fully developed until we're 25. So we spend all of this money into things that really don't matter or mean anything, or we can't even remember where the money went. And so yeah, I think it's time for gaming to get to a healthier place because I think we can all agree that gaming feels unhealthy. So with that, folks, if you're interested, you can like, sub, all that jazz, turn bell notifications on, and I will see you on the next one.